tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So we've been, for a bit now, in the realm of the foundational teachings. We started the year talking about the middle way, and got our way into the core matrix of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of dukkha, difficulty, unsatisfactoriness, suffering, the truth of the cause of that suffering, which is craving, the truth of the cessation of suffering that comes when cessation ceases, and the truth of the path that can be cultivated to lead to that cessation. And I was thinking about it this week and thinking in a way interweaving with some other listening I've been doing. Some of you know that I've been listening to a long podcast history of the history of philosophy. So it's called The History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. So it's this very nerdy philosophy professor in Europe. I think he's an American though. Talking very slowly through European, but also Indian, African, Chinese, Islamic philosophies, very gradually. And I'm like, I don't know, 350 episodes in or something like that. And we've just barely gotten to the Italian Renaissance, so very slow going. And it's just delightful. And one of the things that it's talking about, and that was really a theme in the early European Renaissance, was ideas about agency, ideas about what it is. And this was true throughout kind of early European philosophy, the Greek philosophy into the Middle Ages, questions about what is it that gives us the capacity to make choices? How do we choose? How do we will an action? And, in the Christian world, there were, philosophical conversations about determinism, like if God knows everything or intends everything, does that mean we don't have a choice about what we do? If God knows what we're going to do, does that mean it's predetermined? All of these kinds of questions were churning around. And so I've been thinking about agency and will and intentionality. And in the Dharma, first of all, don't get too confused, although we can go there, about, the teaching of not self. Like, there's not a solid permanent identity here that's doing the choosing. And it can sometimes be easy to say like, oh, if that's the case, then is everything either predetermined or completely karmically conditioned? And the Buddha would say no, right? It might seem like past karma, my past actions and past conditions, the actions of others, press on me so hard, so strongly, that in this moment, even the thing that seems like a choice is just the result of past conditioning. I was taught to speak this way, act this way. I was traumatized, so I speak this way, act this way. I was raised with this kind of privilege or identity or social location, and so I speak this way, act this way. And the Buddha gives an interesting answer to this, because he at the same time wants to say, yes, that's partly true, right? The influence, the force coming from the past is so strong that it impels us to be reborn. It creates the kind of life we're born into. It creates the conditions for the mind states we experience, right? So much of what we experience is a fruit of the past, our actions and others' actions, conditions. And that's how karma works. At the same time, if it was only that, if there was nothing else, if there was no way to intervene in that system. In other words, to train the mind or to cultivate, um, to interrupt patterns, to heal traumas. If there was no way to do that, then liberation wouldn't be possible, right? If I have just like a long string of bad habits from many, many endless lifetimes, or, if I just carry the weight of, generational trauma, um, the heaviness that has fed into this moment, how do I turn toward goodness? How do I turn toward wise action, caring for others? How do I interrupt patterns of harm, especially deep ones? And the Buddha says that, that there's this interesting feedback loop where there's the past pressing on us, but there is also this, this spark of malleability. And this malleability is that the heart can be trained, it can be cultivated, and it takes conditions to do this. So every once in a while, in a very rare condition, when there's no Dharma in the world, someone arises who kind of on their own, um, or in the mix that they find themselves in, gives rise to a new spark, rediscovers the Four Noble Truths, rediscovers the truths of suffering and its cause and cessation and the path. But once those people have arisen, and those people are called Buddhas, right? Once someone like that arises and they teach, then there's this momentum. And that momentum is tremendously important because it's that momentum that makes it possible for any of the rest of us to follow this path and awaken. And it's a way of saying that the thing that the Dhamma asks us to do, to notice the quality of craving and to stop doing that, and that if we can stop doing that, the pain will decrease, right? Suffering will end. This is so anti-intuitive. It doesn't feel right, The thing I want, it feels right to get it. It's instinctual, I want my headache to go away. It's totally natural, I want, I want a healthy, wholesome, vibrant partnership, let's say, in this life. Natural. And the Buddha says, um, it's not the pleasure of not having a headache or the pleasure of having a good partner that's the problem. It's the craving that constricts the heart in wanting them that gives rise to the painfulness of this world, the pain of not getting what you want, the pain of losing something beautiful that you have. And so the instruction to interrupt craving is a strange one. It's a difficult instruction. And so we need the karmic seed of being taught this. It doesn't come naturally to very many people. To some people it does. And again, if they take that all the way, they become Buddhas. It's beautiful. But most of us need to be told this. And so we get the karmic momentum of the Sangha and of the teachings of the Dhamma being in the world, right? And you hear this teaching, that suffering is a truth. It's true that things are painful. It's true that loss is painful. It's true that the uncertainty of things is painful. And then you get the second truth, right? That there's both a reason for this and this is the fourth truth, it's a reason that you can do something about, right? You can do something about craving. And so with the support of these karmic conditions, this spark of agency arises. And honestly, this is mysterious. Like, where does it come from? Why do we have choices? Why are you able to cultivate the path and not just be a victim of your circumstances in an endless round? To even hear the Dhamma and turn toward it, even to have your ears perk up and be like, wait, what did they say? End of suffering? What? Even to sort of perk up at that is a little waking up. Because what that's doing is interrupting this stream of patterning that we've been raised in, caught in, living in. You have to interrupt the flood. So the Buddhas come in, they plant the seed of the Dhamma, and the Dhamma interrupts this ongoing flow. So you have an initial waking up right when you first hear the Dhamma. And it gives rise to a kind of what's called bright faith, this initial like, wait a minute, this seems worth listening to. And having been touched by an encounter with the Dhamma in this way, this thing arises in us where we are able to make choices. And so the quality of will in the Buddhist language, in Pali, the word is cetana, and it's mostly translated, not always as will, that's kind of old translation, most often as like volition. And you can feel it as this impulse that is different from what we could call like an autonomic impulse, right? So there's every action and every word that we speak, everything we do, is preceded by a little burst of impulse, of volition. But some of those volitions are unconscious. You know, I get an itch, I just scratch it. I get angry, I say something without really thinking. I get a little achy, I squirm. Um, uh, so many things. The impulse toward action is coming as a reaction. It's coming reactively. It's autonomic in a way. And one way we can think about this is that it's unconscious. We are unaware of the impulse arising to, let's say, speak out of anger when we're in a stressful situation. We learn through training to pause before we speak. What is that pausing, right? We've taken some part of our will. We've been inspired by the teachings of, let's say, ethics or non-harming with our speech, right? Or we've just learned through experience that speaking out of anger doesn't go so well often. And we interrupt an impulse. And this is a very interesting moment because, something is coming through and wants to move in a certain way, and some other part of us says, no, wait, don't do that, do something else. And so there's unconscious volition that basically acts out of its karmic patterns. It acts out its patterns. So, when I'm acting on an unconscious bias, right, the volition there to say something unskillful or biased is, it's coming without my conscious thinking about it. Like I'm speaking or acting habitually. So often what happens when we speak or act habitually is that, we reinforce or repeat or reiterate unskillful patterns of behavior, right? We wouldn't still be here churning and suffering if we didn't have unskillful patterns. So when we are unaware of volition arising, that's a response to those patterns, as often as not, it continues those patterns. Patterns are patterns because they continue. And so the wedge or the choice point in our practice, and this is moment to moment, mind moment to mind moment. It's really like exactly what's happening when we notice or don't notice a distracting thought, or when we pause before speaking over and over, or we pause in a big transition moment in our life and we say, wait, what do I really want to do here? Rather than just acting on habit. Whenever we do this, we are bringing up this part of our agency, this part of our will that has gotten connected with the wholesome. It's gotten connected with the Dharma or with some other wise view, right? It's gotten connected with the intention to not cause harm or, the intention to move in a more healthy way for myself and others in the world. And based on this, it interrupts old patterns and tries to cultivate new ones. And that's the fourth noble truth. That's the cultivation of the path. And so the second noble truth, right? Craving, which gives rise to suffering, pain, dissatisfaction, distress. So what is craving? When you crave something, when there's this, it's not the same, it's not quite the same as desire. It's not just wanting, but it's the kind of fixated or contracted wanting. And it's not just the emotional wanting of like, I want the thing I want, it's also all of the ways that our patterns get fixated. When we have a habit where we always do a thing a certain way, we can think of that as a kind of craving. Like there's an attachment to doing things a certain way that has become calcified in our stream of actions. If craving is a kind of wanting, like really a strong wanting for something, an experience, a person, a thing, a state, this wanting has a kind of action potential in it, right? It's a solidified kind of impulse that says, I'm aiming toward this thing, and I want to do something to attain it. I want to get what I want. I want to prevent what I don't want. I don't want to lose what I like. One way we can think about this craving thing is, hang on just a moment. Yes, darling? Yes. I can eat it? Yes. The yogurt is ready. Somebody was craving yogurt. It is ready. We can think of craving as an unconscious volition or movement toward action that has coalesced into a force, like a feeling that fills us, that kind of pushes us in a direction. And it has done this, if craving is by definition the unwholesome, it's the unwholesome side of wanting or desiring, loving, liking. If we have, let's say we've connected with the Dhamma, as you all have, right? If you are listening to this, somehow you've connected with the Dhamma. So you've been drawn toward the wholesome. At the heart of connecting with spiritual practice of maybe any kind, but particularly, this Dhamma of the Buddhas, the very heart of this is the wholesome, is ethical, wise action. Acting in the world, in our relationships, and in our words and actions in a way that doesn't hurt others as best we can, right? That helps instead of hurting. When we've connected with, let's say, the impulse toward wholesomeness, I want to speak in a way that does well for other people and myself. I want to act in a way that helps, that's compassionate, that's skillful. Let's say you have this intention, like at some point in your life, that has been palpable. I have the intention to do good. Why are we not able to consistently act on that intention? Right? This is one of the ancient philosophical questions about, why there is evil, why God lets there be evil in the world, why we are unable to not sin. That would be the Christian way of saying it. In a Buddhist way of saying it, we could say, having planted the intention to act skillfully, why is it so difficult to do so? Why do we, having planted the intention to sit in meditation and stay with the breath, Why is it so difficult to do so? And the mind leaps off into somewhere else. What's up with that? Craving is a way of saying that there are these skillful actions born of our intention for goodness, and we do them on purpose. And particularly when we're in the beginning of our training, which is maybe the first many years or lifetimes of the path, that's meant to be encouraging, not discouraging, but um, we cultivate the path intentionally, right? It takes intentionality to to resist doing things that we know are unhealthy, but that are, you know, give an immediate dopamine hit, or um, uh, in whatever way we know are not quite good for us, but we want it anyway. It takes um, being awake to desire to resist those things, to eat less sugar or whatever is your thing that you're trying to work on. And on the other side of that, there's this force, right? And in the Buddhist system, uh, we don't get to blame it on a devil or on, original sin or anything like that. It's just us. It's just the patterns, the habits of craving, of confusion, of delusion. So then there's this force that makes choices, pushes us in directions, and those impulses are unconscious, largely, right? If I'm aware of an impulse towards something unwholesome, if I'm aware of it right when it arises, being aware of something means I have some agency in relation to it, right? If you notice an impulse arising, you have a much greater chance of interrupting it if you choose to. If you don't notice that impulse arising, you have a much lower chance of making a conscious choice about it. And so there's this intimate connection between the thing we call mindfulness, understanding, clear seeing, and the thing we could call skillfulness, ethics, will, agency, wise action. They're completely connected, right? So cravings are forces that lead to unskillful action based in not seeing volitions arise, not seeing what's at the root of this kind of confused impulse to grasp. Skillful actions come from the intention to do good, but also the cultivation of an awareness that keeps its eye on one's state so that you can actually make a choice moment to moment about what to do, about how to bring the mind back from distraction, or how to choose my words, or whatever I'm needing, how to put down, the cookie or the phone or the gun or whatever I have to resist. So then one of the questions that comes for me has to do with, in a way, how we can so easily fall into blaming ourselves for our states, for craving, for unskillful states. So, in this long story of the early Renaissance, I've gotten up to this period in the Italian Renaissance, and one of the things that was happening round about the same time over in France was the beginning of the end of the beginning of the end of the Hundred Years' War, and in a small village in France, uh, a teenage girl started having visions, hearing voices that she became convinced were the voices of angels. And based on those voices, she ran away from home, made her way all the way to the French court, and somehow, through extraordinary charisma and force of will, got herself into the presence of the King of France, the Dauphin, really, the son, the person that should have been the King of France, the son of the old king, who was completely losing a very long war to the English, um, and got herself into the presence of the King of France. Not only convinced him that she was truly hearing the voices of angels, but convinced him to give her an army, a brand new coat of armor, to let her dress as a man, like a knight, to give her an enormous jeweled sword and a huge white banner, and a black horse to ride on that she had never ridden before, but she became very good at very quickly. And this young woman who called herself Joan the Maid rode out at the head of a French army. Who let her do this, right? And so she has this extraordinary short life of adventure. She liberates the town of Orleans. She does defeat the English and crowns the young French king as king. She becomes the most like well-known celebrity in all of Europe for a little while. And then she gets captured by the English, put on trial for heresy, and eventually executed. And in her trial, where the English and the Burgundians, who they were allied with, total side note into medieval geopolitics, but um, as they have her on trial, one of the core questions, and they're taking this very seriously, it's not a show trial, even though it is political. They're really asking the question. They're very devout Christians, and they say she's claiming to hear the voices of angels. Could they be real, and how would we know? And they go through all of this kind of rounds of investigation trying to figure out what to make of the story of these angelic voices. And one of the core questions ends up being, I promise you this is related to our thing about agency and will. One of the core questions they end up wrestling with is she intentionally doing something that's against church doctrine, or is she being tricked? Because if the voices are um, if the voices are if she's a witch and she's intentionally calling on demonic forces, and she's therefore lying when she says that she's devout, and she's intentionally deceiving, people, then that's a particular kind of crime. It's a particular kind of heresy. And again, I'm not defending the patriarchy or the church in any way, but that's sort of their conclusion is like, if she's doing it intentionally, that's one thing. But, they say, we all know that the devil is very powerful. What if these are demonic voices, but they've tricked her? Like, what if she is actually devout and she doesn't know who they are? What if she's actually been duped? And if that's the case, then she's not a witch. She's actually an ordinary sinner who has been deluded by a very powerful, you know, deceptive force. And there's no blame in that. And so they really have to wrestle with this. And listening to this story, um, this was a different podcast. This was a short series on the Rest is History podcast, but they happen to be both about the same time because I'm consistent in my listening. And if I'm in the 14th century, I'm going to stick with the 14th century across the board. Um, really think about this. Like, and if we translate it into Buddhist language, we could say, do we blame someone, including do we blame ourselves for unskillfulness, for craving, right? For unskillful desires. If I am under the spell of, you know, as one of the great Buddhist poems says, my ancient twisted karma, if I'm under the spell of that and it's pressing on me with such force, essentially trauma, right? And I'm reenacting these things that are unskillful, and I'm unconscious about it. I'm not actually awake to how craving is operating. Is my suffering my fault? And so we can really feel into, you know, in what way do we trace it all back to a kind of fundamental delusion where I'm essentially ignorant of how things really are. It's not actually my fault that I'm ignorant because you know, an eternity of samsara is pressing on me and teaching me this. Or is there a kind of willfulness to my misconduct? When I do something based in craving. And and I'm saying it in a way that maybe is a little philosophically abstract, but in a very direct way. Notice if you blame yourself when you fall into a pit of unskillful mind states. Right? If things are not going well for you, you're craving, you're confused, you're distressed. Do you add the second arrow of like, and I should know better. I shouldn't be falling into this again, right? Um, why does this keep happening? Like I know this pattern, but here I am in it again. And and I think the Buddha very compassionately and I think wisely is on the side of like, yeah, it's delusion, right? It's clearly not you intending to act unskillfully. There's no blame in unskillful action. Um, the place where there's blame is in seeing how powerful the forces of karma are and not arousing the agency to cultivate the path, right? You can say, oh, that's, I could notice that like I have some laziness or resistance and I want to work with that. But I don't want to say, oh, I'm bad because I've fallen into this pattern again, right? And um, one of the things that I was so moved by in kind of hearing this story of Joan of Arc was the reports of the very last days of her life where she's been in this trial and she's actually it's clear that even in herself she's trying to figure out what exactly are these voices. Can I trust them? Like what if these churchmen are correct? Like should I doubt this? How do I know what to believe? And and then being in a very dangerous situation for herself, very extremely vulnerable, subject to all the forces of, the patriarchy around her, and how do I communicate about what I know is true in a way that's skillful? And, and I just want to encourage us to hold this, the power of our conscious choicefulness, of our agency, how it's always possible to cultivate more agency, more wakefulness in relation to the situations we find ourselves in, you know, and um, and be wise in relation to, how the forces pressing on us are pressing on us, and um, and just understand that, when craving is doing its thing, and it's beyond our volition. We're not choosing this. That just so much compassion can be brought in for ourselves, you know, and and that the path, in a way, we could think of the whole path as reducing down to, you know, come into more agency around our words and actions, and that comes down to be more awake moment to moment. Be more aware of the arising of impulses born of ancient conditions. The more awake we are to them as they arise, the more able we are to either not act on them or do something else, but to do it intentionally. Because whenever we act with intention, with real intention from the heart, it's going to be in the direction of skillfulness. This, I think, is at the heart of the sincerity of practice, that all unskillfulness in some way is born of unconsciousness. I think that once we connect with the path, and maybe this is a like, take refuge, whatever that means to you, if we are awake and we have access to our energy and our agency, we will try to make skillful choices. And we won't always succeed, but we will try. So blessings to the memory of all the mystics, the memory of teenage Joan facing the church hierarchy with the voices of angels in her head and finding a path of authenticity in the presence of so much power and force and oppression. And may our practice of confronting craving with infinite compassion and patience be born of the sincere desire to cultivate the good and to act from that intention. All right. Pausing there. Thanks so much.